No, ma'am, you're not allowed to escort the remains on this flight. The airline agent's voice was sharp, final. Those were the words Sergeant Erin Carter faced, words meant to break her spirit as she tried to bring her fallen friend home. But then a Vietnam veteran rose. A widow spoke up. A tide of support swept through every traveler at that gate. And finally, the captain himself stepped in, shifting everything in a way no one could have seen coming. Watch how one soldier's vow and the quiet courage of strangers turned a layover into a moment of honor, a moment no one would ever forget. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The cold Oregon morning pressed in around Cascade City Regional Airport, a biting wind slipping through the cracks of every automatic door. Frost clung to the glass windows, fogging up with each breath from hurried travelers and weary airline staff. It was a place caught between motion and stillness, every soul there focused on their own path. Sergeant Erin Carter stood among them, her uniform pressed and precise, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Her boots felt heavy against the worn carpet, but her eyes were clear, focused only on the mission that had brought her here. In the cargo hold of the plane, waiting outside, Corporal Ryan Miller's casket lay draped in a flag, silent witness to a promise she couldn't forget. Ryan had been her friend, her brother in uniform. They'd shared laughter over instant coffee, swapped letters from home, watched the same sunrises from different foxholes. He wasn't supposed to be in that casket. Not yet, not like this. Erin had carried him out of the desert herself, blood on her gloves and prayers on her lips, and she'd sworn to his mother that she would bring him all the way home. The ticket in her hand shook a little as she approached the check-in desk. Her heart thudded slow and heavy, her mind rehearsing every regulation and every clearance she had memorized. She was the escort, his escort, and nothing would separate them now. The airline agent behind the counter didn't even look up when she spoke. Name, he asked flatly, fingers tapping the keyboard in a bored rhythm. Erin swallowed her frustration. Sergeant Erin Carter, she said, her voice steady. I'm here to confirm the procedure for transporting Corporal Ryan Miller to Redfield, Kansas. The agent's eyes flickered to her paperwork, then back to the screen. He squinted, his frown deepening as he read. Layover in Denver, he said finally, his tone clipped. Policy says you'll be rebooked on a separate flight. The remains will transfer on their own. Erin felt the words hit like a blow to her chest. That's not possible, she said quietly. She leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. I have military escort clearance. I stay with the remains. The agent didn't blink. Ma'am, that's not how this works. It's company policy. You'll reunite with the casket in Redfield. He said it like he was reading from a script, each word cold and final. Erin's jaw tightened. I can't accept that, she said, her hand tightening around her duffel strap. I promised his family I'd be with him. All the way, the agent sighed, exasperation creeping into his voice. Sergeant, I don't make the rules. You'll have to take it up with a supervisor. He turned away, already moving on to the next passenger, leaving Erin standing there in the noise of rolling suitcases and overhead announcements. She felt a flicker of something deep and cold in her gut, familiar, unwelcome. The same feeling she'd had every time she'd been told to stand down, to wait, to watch, but she'd never been good at waiting when it mattered. A memory rose in her mind, unbidden and sharp. Ryan's mother, her hands trembling around a worn photograph. Promise me, she'd whispered. Promise me he won't be alone. Erin had taken that promise into her bones. She wouldn't break it now. She drew in a slow breath, steadying her voice. I'd like to speak with a supervisor, she said, each word precise as a rifle shot. The agent rolled his eyes but reached for his radio, muttering something Erin couldn't hear. She waited, feeling the weight of every second pressed down on her shoulders. Around her, the airport hummed with indifferent energy. Families jostled past, children chattered, screens flashed departure times in bright letters. But for Erin, The world had narrowed to a single point of focus, Ryan's casket waiting somewhere she couldn't see, and the promise she wouldn't break. The minutes stretched out, long and heavy. She could feel her heart thumping in her chest, a quiet drumbeat of defiance. She wasn't just a passenger here. She was a soldier. And this was one more mission she wouldn't fail. A voice crackled over the agent's radio, and he looked up at her with a flicker of annoyance. "Supervisor's on their way," he said shortly. Erin nodded once, her jaw set. She wasn't going anywhere. Not until she had answers. Not until she knew Ryan wouldn't be left behind. She glanced at the tarmac through the window, the distant silhouette of the plane framed by swirling exhaust and morning haze. The cargo hold was closed now, the casket hidden from view, but she could still feel him there. The memory of his laughter, his steady calm in the worst of nights, the way he'd always been there when she needed him. Now it was her turn. The minutes passed in slow, aching silence. Erin stood straight, the edge of her duffel brushing her hip, her eyes never leaving the agent behind the counter. She could hear the chatter of the terminal, the echo of footsteps, but it all seemed far away. Then she saw him, an older man, his face weathered by time, wearing a faded green jacket and a ball cap embroidered with a campaign medal. He watched her from a nearby seat, his gaze steady and thoughtful. He rose slowly, the weight of years in his posture, and walked over to stand beside her. "What's the holdup, Sergeant?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, soft but sure. Erin turned, surprised. "Policy," she said simply. "They want me on a different flight than Corporal Miller." The old man's eyes darkened, a flicker of something fierce and unyielding. "That's not right," he said, his voice growing stronger. "Not for someone who gave everything." Before she could reply, he turned to the agent, his presence calm but unmistakably firm. "Son," he said quietly, "you need to understand something. That soldier deserves an escort every mile home." The agent hesitated, his fingers pausing on the keyboard. For the first time, there was a crack in his practiced indifference. Erin felt something shift in the air around them, a quiet gravity that pulled at the edges of the bustling terminal. She stood a little straighter, the promise in her heart burning brighter. She didn't know this old man, but she knew the weight he carried in his voice, and she knew she wasn't alone. The supervisor still hadn't arrived. The agent shifted uncomfortably under the old man's steady gaze, the hum of the terminal fading to a hush around them. Erin glanced down at the ticket in her hand, the name Corporal Ryan Miller printed in neat letters. It wasn't just paper, it was a vow. She looked back at the old man, his lined face set with quiet resolve. In that moment, she felt the cold, sharp fear in her chest give way to something stronger. She was a soldier. She was his escort. And she wasn't done fighting yet. The minutes crawled by like a slow march, each one pressing down on Erin's shoulders. She could feel the weight of the promise she had made, the echoes of war still ringing in her bones. She wouldn't let him be left alone, not now, not ever. The agent shifted behind the counter, his eyes darting between Erin and the older veteran who stood beside her. "Ma'am, I've told you this is company policy," he said again, his tone flat but defensive. Erin's jaw tightened. "I understand," she said quietly, "but I'm not leaving this desk until someone higher up tells me that to my face." Frank Mitchell, his name stitched in faded gold on the edge of his jacket, nodded once. "She's right," he said firmly, his voice carrying a calm authority that silenced the nearby chatter. "You can't separate a soldier from his escort. That's not just a policy, it's a promise." The agent opened his mouth to reply, but Frank didn't give him the chance. "I've buried too many friends," he said, his eyes fixed on the agent's, "and every one of them had someone to see them home. Don't you forget that." Erin felt a flicker of gratitude at Frank's words, a steady warmth in her chest. She could still see Ryan's mother in her mind, her quiet grief, the way her fingers had traced the edge of a photograph like it was the last piece of him she had left. Erin wasn't just carrying Ryan's name. She was carrying her promise to his family. The supervisor arrived a few minutes later, a man in a crisp uniform with a clipboard clutched in one hand. He glanced at the small crowd gathering near the counter, his brow furrowed. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, his voice careful but curious. Erin stepped forward, her voice steady. "I'm Sergeant Erin Carter," she said. "I'm the official military escort for Corporal Ryan Miller. Your agent says I have to be separated from the remains at Denver. That's not acceptable." The supervisor flipped through the paperwork in his hands, his eyes scanning the details. "This is standard policy," he said slowly. "Escorts are usually rebooked separately on domestic layovers. That's just how it's done." "It's not how it's done for me," Erin said, her tone calm but unyielding. "I have clearance, and I have a promise to keep." Her eyes met his, steady and unflinching. She could feel the tension in the air thickening, every breath sharp with the weight of it. Frank spoke up again, his voice low but clear. "Son, you don't turn your back on someone who gave everything. You don't tell a soldier to let go of their duty." His words hung in the air like a prayer, soft and powerful. The supervisor shifted, uncomfortable under the weight of their gaze. "Let me check with my manager," he said finally, his voice tight. He turned away, disappearing into a back office behind the counter. Erin let out a slow breath, her hand flexing around the strap of her duffel. She wasn't done fighting. She'd never been done. The crowd around them had grown travelers pausing mid-stride, some curious, others moved by the quiet determination they saw in Erin's eyes. A woman in a neat black coat clutched a folded flag in her lap, her fingers white against the fabric. Her eyes were red, but she stood and walked closer, her voice trembling. "My husband," she said softly, "was brought home by a soldier like you. Don't let them tell you it doesn't matter." Erin nodded once, her throat tight. "It matters," she said, the words quiet but fierce. "It always matters." The woman nodded back, her shoulders squared with a quiet resolve. She didn't say another word, but her presence alone spoke volumes. A young man in a business suit watched the exchange, his brow furrowed. "They bend over backwards for celebrities," he said, his voice low but indignant. "Why can't they make an exception for this around them?" Heads nodded. The murmur of agreement grew louder, a slow swell of support that cut through the sterile announcements overhead. Erin didn't look away from the door the supervisor had vanished behind. She could feel every second dragging by, the weight of the casket waiting somewhere she couldn't see. She thought of the last time she'd seen Ryan's face, the quiet smile he'd given her after a long night watch. She wouldn't let him down. The supervisor reemerged, his face pale and pinched. "I've spoken to management," he said, his voice stiff. "The policy stands. You'll be rebooked separately." Erin felt a chill spread through her chest, but she didn't back down. "Then I'll stay here until you change it," she said evenly. "I'm not leaving him." Frank placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent promise that he was with her. The woman with the folded flag stepped closer, her face set with quiet determination, and the young businessman moved to stand beside her, his presence a wordless testament to what they all believed in. Around them, the small crowd grew still. The murmur of conversation fell away, replaced by something deeper: respect, solidarity, a shared understanding that some battles were worth fighting, even in a crowded terminal on a cold morning. Erin squared her shoulders, her eyes locked on the supervisor. "You may have your policies," she said softly, "but I have my orders, and I have my promise." Her voice didn't waver, not once. The supervisor hesitated, glancing at the growing circle of passengers around them. He opened his mouth to speak again, but no words came out. He looked down at the clipboard in his hands like it might hold the answers he couldn't find. A young gate agent nearby, one who'd been watching the whole exchange, cleared her throat quietly. "Maybe," she said, her voice hesitant but sure, "maybe it's time we remember what those orders mean." Her words were like a pebble dropped in still water, a quiet ripple that spread outward in the hush. The supervisor swallowed, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He still held the clipboard, but his eyes had lost their certainty. Erin didn't press him. She just stood her ground, the silent weight of her promise filling the space between them. In the quiet that followed, something shifted. The tension in the air didn't vanish, but it softened just a little. Erin felt it in the way people watched her, in the way the crowd held its breath. She wasn't alone. She never had been. And as the minutes ticked by, Erin Carter Soldier, escort, friend stood in that terminal with her back straight and her head high. She wasn't asking for special treatment. She wasn't asking for recognition. She was asking for one simple thing: honor. And for Corporal Ryan Miller, she would ask again and again until someone finally understood. The quiet that had settled over the terminal felt like a single, held breath. Erin's shoulders ached from the weight of the duffel strap, but she didn't move. Her gaze locked on the supervisor's pale face. The old veteran, Frank Mitchell, stood beside her, silent but unyielding. Then, the low crackle of the intercom split the hush like a blade. "This is Captain David Armstrong," a calm voice said, each word deliberate. "Could Sergeant Erin Carter please come to the podium?" A ripple passed through the crowd. Surprise, curiosity, a glimmer of hope. Erin's throat tightened. She adjusted her duffel and stepped forward, each footstep slow and certain. The supervisor didn't meet her eyes as she passed, and she didn't spare him a glance. At the gate podium, Captain Armstrong stood waiting, his uniform crisp, his presence steady. He was in his late 50s, silver hair neatly combed, eyes that held a quiet authority. He extended his hand, and Erin took it, feeling the strength in his grip. "Sergeant Carter," he said, his voice low but caring. "I heard what happened." He paused, his eyes steady on hers. "I want you to know I understand." The supervisor shifted behind the desk, his fingers drumming nervously on the keyboard. Captain Armstrong turned to him, his tone still calm but edged with something harder. "This soldier will remain with Corporal Miller's casket," he said. "That is my request." The supervisor swallowed, his voice a dry whisper. "Sir, it's company policy. I know the policy." Captain Armstrong cut in, his tone unwavering. "I also know that policy can be set aside when honor demands it." His words hung in the air like a vow. The supervisor faltered, glancing from the captain to Erin, then back again. Around them, the terminal seemed to hush even more, every breath a quiet witness. Finally, with a small, reluctant nod, the supervisor said, "Understood, sir." Erin let out a slow breath, relief flooding her chest like warm water. She hadn't expected the captain to intervene, but now, standing beside him, she realized something simple and powerful. She wasn't fighting this alone. Captain Armstrong turned back to her, his eyes softening. "You'll stay with him," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Every mile." Erin nodded once, her voice caught in her throat. "Yep, sir." A murmur of conversation rippled through the waiting passengers, a low hum of approval and something else, respect. The woman with the folded flag clutched it tighter to her chest, her lips moving in a silent prayer. Frank Mitchell let out a slow breath, his eyes gleaming with something like pride. The captain's gaze swept over the small crowd, his expression calm and composed. "This soldier's keeping her promise," he said, his voice strong but gentle, "and we're going to help her keep it." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold still, then the quiet burst into soft applause, hands clapping hesitantly at first, then stronger, until the sound filled the terminal like a warm tide. Erin felt her eyes burn, but she blinked the tears back. She stood tall, her back straight, her promise to Ryan clear in every breath she took. The supervisor said nothing more, his face pale and shuddered as he returned Erin's paperwork. She took it with steady hands, her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't need his apology. She didn't need his understanding. She had something better. She had the strength of those who stood beside her. As she turned to go, Captain Armstrong gave her a quiet nod. "You're doing the right thing, Sergeant," he said. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." "Thank you, sir." she said softly, her voice a little steadier now. She moved through the small crowd, the warmth of their claps and nods following her like a quiet echo of promise. She could feel the weight of every step, but she carried it willingly. At the boarding gate, the airline agent waited, her lips tight and her eyes hard. "Your seat has been reassigned," she said, her tone clipped. "You'll be in the last row." Aaron felt the words like a final slap, the petty cruelty of someone who hadn't learned what service truly meant, but she didn't let it show. She took the new boarding pass with a calm nod. "Understood," she said simply. The agent's smirk didn't last long. A voice behind Aaron cut through the hush, measured, warm, and impossibly calm. "Actually," it said, "that seat's taken." Aaron turned, surprised. Mr. Robert Harlow, the businessman in the tailored suit, stood there, his briefcase tucked under one arm. He held out his own boarding pass to the agent, his expression mild but unyielding. "She can have mine," he said quietly. "First class, seat 3A. The agent's eyes widened. "Sir, I'm Mr. Harlow didn't waver. "It's done," he said. He turned to Aaron and offered a small, kind smile. "You bring him home, Sergeant," he said softly. Aaron's lips parted in surprise. "You don't have to, I do," he interrupted gently. "It's the least I can do." He didn't wait for her thanks. He just turned back to the agent, his posture calm but resolute. The agent hesitated, then scanned the boarding pass with a tight nod. "Fine," she said stiffly. Aaron felt something in her chest loosen, a quiet exhale of relief she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She took the first-class boarding pass with both hands, her fingers brushing the smooth paper like it was something sacred. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice breaking just a little. "Mr. Harlow just smiled again, then turned away to join the line of passengers boarding the plane. Aaron watched him for a moment, the kindness of strangers still fresh and raw in her chest. She didn't know his story, but in that moment, she didn't have to. As she walked down the jet bridge, her steps slow and measured, she felt the echoes of the applause in her ears. She felt Ryan's presence in every breath, the quiet memory of his laughter and the steady weight of the promise she carried. And she felt something else, something she hadn't known she'd been missing. She wasn't alone. Not now. Not ever. The plane was quiet as she boarded, the low hum of engines blending with the soft rustle of passengers settling into their seats. Aaron found her row 3A, just as Mr. Harlow had said. She stowed her duffel carefully, her fingers lingering for a moment on the worn strap. As she settled into the plush seat, she felt the contrast of the small kindness that had brought her here. She glanced down at the folded boarding pass in her hand, her fingers tightening around it like an anchor. She didn't need luxury. She didn't need comfort. She just needed to know she hadn't failed Ryan. As the last passengers boarded, the captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "before we take off, I'd like to acknowledge someone very special on this flight today." Aaron's breath caught in her throat, her fingers curling around the armrest. She didn't want the attention. She didn't need the recognition. But the captain's words flowed over her like a quiet benediction. "Sergeant Aaron Carter," he said softly, "is escorting Corporal Ryan Miller home. She promised his family he would never be alone, and she's keeping that promise." A hush fell over the cabin, soft and reverent. Then slowly, one by one, passengers began to clap. Not loud, not forced, but real. A sound that said they saw her. A sound that said they understood. Erin bowed her head, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. She didn't need them to know her name. She just needed them to know why she was here. She was a soldier. She was his escort. And she would see him home. The steady hum of the engines carried a quiet calm as the plane leveled off. The sky a deep navy beyond the small round windows. Erin sat in her seat, her back straight, one hand resting gently on the duffel at her feet. She could feel the weight of every mile, every moment of this final journey. Captain David Armstrong's voice broke through the soft murmur of the cabin, smooth and sure. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, each word deliberate, "we have the honor of carrying someone very special home today." The cabin fell silent, every conversation pausing as passengers turned to listen. "Sergeant Aaron Carter is escorting Corporal Ryan Miller home," he continued. "She's keeping a promise to him, to his family, and to every soldier who ever gave their all." There was a pause, a breath that seemed to echo in the hush. "Let us honor her and him in our hearts." A moment later, the quiet was broken by a single clap, then another. Sound swelled, soft but steady, until it filled the cabin with a gentle rhythm of respect. Erin didn't move, her head bowed slightly, her hand still on the duffel that held Ryan's folded flag. She didn't need their applause. She didn't need the recognition. But in that moment, she felt the weight of every set of eyes, every hand that clapped, and she knew she wasn't alone. The applause faded slowly, leaving behind a soft hush. Erin closed her eyes, breathing in that silence like a prayer. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just sat there, steady as a stone, holding on to the promise she had made. Hours later, the wheels of the plane touched down in Redfield, Kansas. The sun was just beginning to set, painting the horizon in deep gold and pale pink. Erin's heart thudded in her chest as the plane taxied to the gate, each jolt of the wheels a reminder that they were almost home. She rose when the doors opened, the duffel held close against her hip. The flight attendant gave her a small nod, her eyes soft with understanding. Erin nodded back, her throat tight but her steps sure. Down the narrow jet bridge, each footstep echoed in the quiet. She could see the small group waiting beyond the glass, Ryan's family, their faces pale and anxious, the weight of this day etched into every line of their expressions. Ryan's mother, Evelyn, stood in the center, a tissue clutched tight in her hand. Her eyes met Erin's, and in that look full of grief, and hope, and something stronger, Erin felt the promise settle deep in her bones. She wasn't here for medals. She wasn't here for thanks. She was here because she'd said she would be. Erin paused at the end of the jet bridge, straightening her uniform one last time. She drew a breath, slow and steady, feeling the weight of the moment wrap around her shoulders like a cloak. Then she stepped forward. The air outside was crisp, the scent of fuel and fresh-cut grass carried on a soft breeze. Ryan's father, tall and stoic, reached for her hand as she approached. She took it without hesitation, her grip firm but gentle. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick. "Thank you for bringing him home." Erin nodded once. "He's never been alone," she said softly. "Not for a single mile." She turned then, her eyes catching the gleam of the casket being lowered from the cargo hold. The flag draped over it fluttered slightly in the breeze, the red and white stripes vivid against the dark metal. She walked with them as they moved Ryan's casket to the waiting hearse, each step slow and measured, each breath a silent prayer. At the car, she paused, laying a hand on the casket's edge. Her fingers traced the smooth wood through the fabric of the flag, her head bowed. "Rest easy." "Ryan," she whispered, "we've got you from here." She stepped back, her hand falling to her side. The family moved close, their tears quiet but steady. Erin didn't intrude on that moment. She stood a little apart, her shoulders straight, her gaze steady. When the car doors closed and the family turned to her, she saw the gratitude in their eyes. Not for what she'd done, but for the simple, stubborn fact that she had been there, that she hadn't let him be alone. She didn't offer them promises she couldn't keep. She didn't offer empty words of comfort. She just nodded once, her voice low, and even as she said, "He was a brother to me, and I will always honor him." They didn't need to know her name. They didn't need to know her story. They just needed to know that Ryan Miller had never walked alone. As the hearse pulled away, Erin stood in the fading light, the cold air brushing her cheeks. She watched until the car disappeared around the corner. the last glimmer of the flag vanishing into the quiet evening. She felt a calm settle over her chest, a slow exhale of something she hadn't known she'd been holding. It wasn't relief, there was no relief in death. It was something different, something steadier. She had done what she said she would, and that was enough. On the flight home, she sat in the small terminal, her duffel at her feet. The chatter of travelers washed around her, but she didn't hear it. She watched the sun dip below the horizon, the sky darkening to a soft indigo. She thought of Ryan's laugh, the way he'd always known how to find light in the darkest places. She thought of his mother's quiet strength. She thought of the old veteran and the young businessman, and every hand that had reached out to help her keep her promise. She thought of what it meant to stand for someone else, even when the world said to sit down, even when no one was watching, even when it was hard. Erin closed her eyes for a moment, the last rays of light warm against her face. She didn't need to be remembered. She didn't need to be thanked. She just needed to know that in a world that moved too fast, some things still held true. That honor wasn't found in medals or parades. It was found in the quiet acts of people who showed up, who stood their ground, who kept their promises no matter what. As she rose to catch her flight back to Oregon, she felt the weight of her duffel balanced across her shoulder, her steps slow and steady. She walked on, each stride a quiet testament to something larger than herself, a promise kept, a debt honored, a life remembered. And in that simple, steady march, Erin Carter carried not just the memory of Ryan Miller, but the quiet truth that some things are worth standing for. Always. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Grateful Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.